Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Zoe Mayfield Boykin. Zoe is an Associate Director of Admissions for professional degree programs here at the Darden School of Business, and she joined our admissions team just a few months ago. I was excited to have Zoe on the podcast to share more about her background, what led her to Darden, what she's enjoyed about her role so far, and much more. We also share some admissions updates, application tips, and a few things that you might want to keep in mind if you're working on an application for our Executive MBA and Part-Time MBA programs. Of course, as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the ExecMBA podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Zoe Mayfield Boykin. Zoe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brett. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. You've been on our team for a few months, and we have not yet had you on the podcast. It's about time.
Well, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today. How's everything going?
Things are going well. We have snow on the ground here in the DC area, but things are well on their way from an admissions perspective.
Yeah, new year, 2025. Got some deadlines upcoming. We are on the verge of our January 10 deadline as we're recording this. We've got a part-time deadline, February 1, just in a few weeks. And again, as of the time of this recording, and yeah, it's an exciting time. So I want to start our conversation by talking a little bit more about you. As I mentioned, you haven't been on the podcast. We haven't had a chance to introduce you yet to our podcast listeners. So I want to take some time today to talk about you. And then the latter half of the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about the application process, kind of where things stand with our respective application cycles for Executive MBA, Part-Time MBA, maybe even share a few application tips, if that sounds okay to you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Well, tell us more about you. Who are you and what's your background?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Zoe Mayfield Boykin. I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts, actually, but I spent close to a decade in Atlanta. So I actually consider both cities home. I'm a big Boston sports fan, though. But my professional background has been in higher education, specifically admissions, in one way or another. I started my career, like many admissions professionals do, in undergraduate admissions at my alma mater, Spelman College. And while there, I managed the Northeast Territory. And that's actually really where I became fascinated with higher education. I became fascinated with the stories of applicants and the role of higher education in our country. And so I spent some time in admissions there. But most recently, I actually spent 4 years on the other side of the proverbial desk, if you will, as a college counselor at a private girls' school. And in that role, I supported 11th and 12th grade students and their families, and I helped them navigate the college admissions process. I learned the world of admissions in that role from an entirely different perspective, and it really deepened my understanding of the admissions process. But most importantly, I had a front row seat to the stories and how those stories come together in an application, and it was really deeply rewarding work. But, my heart has always been with admissions at the university level. And so I decided to take the leap to return back to this side of the desk, which has landed me here at Darden in this role.
And you also have a master's, too?
I do have a master's. So my master's is in higher education. I got my master's at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education.
I can imagine working with prospective college students and their families. You have a lot of empathy for the applicant experience.
You do. You gain a really deep understanding of the hopes, the worries, the anxiety around the entire process, but you really gain a better perspective of the motivation of why people pursue higher education. And it really grounds your experience and your perspective in the work that we do on this side in admissions.
Feels like such a dance. People come in and say, oh, these are the schools I'm thinking about. And some of them may be realistic and others may be real reach schools, and sort of helping a student figure out what schools they should target. That's got to be a process, I would imagine.
It is a process, but I think it's actually more of it's a developmental process. You meet students where they are. And ultimately what I've found is that everyone really lands where they should land. And they all end up with really wonderful opportunities at the end of the day.
So what attracted you to the role at Darden? You mentioned that your heart has always been with, university counseling, working with applicants in this way. So what about the role at Darden really resonated and appealed to you?
Sure. Yeah. So I was initially attracted to Darden because of my ability to grow my skill set as an admissions professional. As I mentioned, I have always, my heart has always been on the university side, working in admissions. And I had had these experiences in undergraduate admissions and a little bit of law school admissions while I was at Harvard. But business school admissions was not something that I had any experience with, and it was an entirely new world to me. So that's what initially attracted me to this role as the associate director of missions for the professional degree programs. But while, like I said, that was what initially drew me, as I started learning more about Darden and the Working Professionals program specifically, I was really blown away by just the high touch approach in admissions that we take and the emphasis that we have on getting to know a candidate as the whole person. That's something that was very rewarding for me on the counseling side. And so to be able to continue to do that in admissions was very, very important. Darden has such a strong community and a relational culture that became very evident early on in my conversations. And so, and you can tell, and it remains true because it starts at the admissions process. And so that's really what drew me to this role. And I'm happy I'm here.
And we both have a shared background in law school admissions. I've worked in law school admissions for about 5 years and student affairs at a law school for 3 years. And I can tell you and say confidently that law school admissions and professional degree program admissions for executive MBA, part-time MBA programs, very different animals. Law school, there's so many people applying, there's thousands and thousands of people. It becomes so much about LSAT and GPA and these kinds of things. Whereas in executive MBA, part-time MBA admissions, the scale is different. You have an opportunity to really get to know people through the process, a lot of individual counseling. That's what I've really enjoyed about it.
Same. I think that the ability to, like I said, get to know folks and the entirety of their stories, and having the scale in the numbers of applications be allow itself and present itself in that way really is what makes this work rewarding.
And I think to your point earlier, when we think about the culture at Garden, to use your word, it's relational. People matter here. You are going to form close relationships with your classmates, faculty, staff. Our goal as an admissions team is to reflect that out to applicants, even as they're just beginning to do their research process, beginning just to engage with the school through the admissions process. We want them to feel that culture as they engage with our team. It sounds like that's something that you're excited about.
Incredibly excited about because I think it translates over to the student experience as well. One of the things that blew me away when I first came to visit Sands Family Grounds in Rosslyn, Virginia, was just the strong sense of connectedness amongst the students. I think it's really easy in working professional programs to sort of have it be a very transactional experience, but I learned very quickly that Darden is not like that at all. Students are very much interested in one another, both professionally and personally. The faculty take interest in students and vice versa. And so I think what goes on in the ability to understand and know a student and understand a student and who they are as a person in the admissions process really is just sort of like the tip of the iceberg of the whole community here at Darden.
And when you think about the structure of the Darden experience, and there's so much about this that suggests that this is not a transactional experience, right? The case method alone, right? The fact that you're going to prepare for class with the idea that you can be called on at any time, ready to contribute to that conversation. That is something that I think pushes students out of that transactional mode. You have to be curious about the other people in the room. You have to be curious about their perspectives and experiences to not only want to add to the conversation, but also to be eager to learn from your fellow classmates. So much of the community at Darden starts in the classroom, and I think that's an important differentiator as people sort of think about sort of culture across these programs. Is the locus of the community at Darden is very much an academic one. What's happening in the classroom and in case method, and of course you extend out from there. You have learning teams. You have 10 plus clubs or organizations serving our professional degree students. You have all kinds of ways that students are engaged outside the classroom too. But the case method, I think, is always a great starting point just to sort of underscore the relational nature of even the learning process here. Let's talk about this fall because obviously a very busy fall for our team and for Sands Family Grounds generally. Was there a highlight from the fall, something that stands out to you, something that you really enjoyed?
So, what's interesting about being new in the fall in such a busy time is that I got to experience everything with these fresh eyes, and so there were many highlights about my first fall here at Darden. But I think when I think about a real event highlight for me, it was the Women Who Lead event in October. That we had here at Sands Family Grounds. It was a panel event where we had four executive MBA alumni and one current part-time MBA student. And we got to hear about how Darden has played this very significant roles, obviously in their careers, but more importantly in their lives. And for me, as someone who was new to the team, new to Darden, it really drove home the importance of the work that we do here in admissions, and the importance of these programs, these working professional programs, and how they can immediately impact the careers of our students. They're able to take what they learn in the classroom and immediately apply it to their careers, but also the long-term effect of their experience in the executive and part-time MBA programs.
Yeah, that was a wonderful event. Sometimes when you go to these panel conversations, you're a little sad that they end around an hour. You always want to hear more. I think that's where I was with that event. The panelists had such great insights and, all different stages of their career and removed from Darden. We actually had a current part-time MBA student on that panel who had actually had a job transition, a promotion during her time. And it was great to hear so many similarities across so much resonance across their stories and all different kinds of people, different backgrounds, different experiences, but yet some real key similarities as they reflect on their Darden experience and what it's meant to them after graduation.
Exactly. I think that it's the similarities. You understand just like the shared experience of what that case method does to the way that you think about your careers, the way you make decisions as a leader in a room. And I think for me that really gave a lot of color to, like I said, speaking about the experience with prospective students.
Yeah, you spend a lot of time talking one-on-one with candidates for both our part-time MBA and executive MBA programs. I can imagine having some of those anecdotes, those stories, it helps in those conversations.
Absolutely. I think, it's very easy to understand and learn about our programs online. That's a very sort of two-dimensional approach to understanding the executive and part-time MBA programs. But when you get on the phone with a candidate and you're able to sort of breathe life into what this 21-month experience would be for an executive MBA program or 28 to 48 months for a part-time MBA program, and using those tangible experiences that were particularly highlighted in that panel, you really start to drive home how transformational this MBA experience can be.
Yeah, we are trying to facilitate even more of those connections with current students, whether it's webinars, panel events, but we also have a new forum that we launched this fall. This is something that I was really excited about, a Connect with Student forum where students can actually request to be connected with students, share a little bit about themselves, maybe some dimensions they'd like for us to keep in mind when making that match. We've seen good response to that forum, and we really do think of our students as the best ambassadors for the program. And I understand as a prospective student, right? You mentioned the website is kind of two-dimensional and sort of very basic information. It's the student perspective that really can make the Darden experience come to life.
I completely agree. I love that form. I love getting on the phone with a prospective student, and they have a very specific life event or very specific transition point that they are in. And I can say, what would be a really good idea? How about you connect with someone who is currently in a very similar position as you, who is doing this program, or someone who has gone through something similar, who has decided then to take this next step. I think that is so helpful because, of course, to your point, Brett, they are the best representatives of this program, folks who are in it, who are living it, and the success that they've had. So I absolutely love that forum, and I try to connect folks as much as I can because, again, I do think it really adds a lot of color to understanding this experience.
The other thing that I think can make the experience here as either executive MBA or part-time student particularly vivid is coming for a class visit. You and I both
Yes.
staff class visits, evenings for part-time MBA class visits, and weekends for executive MBA visits. It's a pretty productive way to spend a couple hours or so. You learn a lot about the program, and you have an opportunity to make a lot of connections. What do you like about the class visits?
What I love about the class visit is it allows students, we talk about this case method, this student-led participatory learning. The faculty serve as a facilitator in this conversation that they're having about this case, the case that is a real business problem. It has a protagonist, and they're trying to puzzle through and make decisions from that general management perspective. What I love about that is that it allows students, number one, it allows students to see the case method come alive. I mean, I can describe it that way all day long, but to see it is a very different thing. But number two, I think it allows students to put themselves in the shoes of someone currently in the program and see themselves as being successful in that space. It can be very intimidating sometimes to hear about, 40%, nearly 40% of your grade is based on class participation. And how in the world will I accomplish learning accounting through a case method? But sitting in that room, sitting in that space, seeing students go back and forth, drawing on their own lived experiences, really allows prospective students to say, "Hey, you know what? I think this would be a really good way for me to learn. I'd be a really good fit here in this program." And so that's what I love the most about those class visits.
Yeah, it's the best way to learn about the Darden experience and answer so many questions in a relatively short period of time. We can unfortunately only accommodate so many people, but we try to offer as many visits as we possibly can within reason, just because it is such a great way to encounter all these things that make Darden distinctive, whether it's the classroom environment and the learning experience, the sense of community and how students engage and relate to each other. And of course, just the feel of our space. I think there's something to be said as a prospective student. You're wondering sort of visually what it would be like for you to be a student here across in either of these programs. So come for class visit. It helps with that visualization aspect. And in fact, we also have tours. If you just want to come and see the space, easy way to do it is via a tour where you have a chance just to come, walk around, have a little bit of a conversation with admissions and other prospective students. But again, on that visualization piece, I think that is a big part as a prospective student. You're doing your research, just sort of trying to get an idea of what it might be like for you to be in the program.
Completely agree.
All right, well, let's talk. We started to get into some admissions things, so Let's talk a little bit about where we are in the cycle. I'll say just at the very beginning of this, we are recording this in early January. It is still very early in our cycle, both for executive MBA and part-time MBA. That may sound surprising to some of our listeners. For those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while and know kind of the rhythm of these cycles, that's not news to you. For those of you who are just learning about the timeline for executive MBA and part-time MBA applicants, it is certainly not too late to apply. We have a number of deadlines upcoming for both of these programs, and we offer multiple deadlines to accommodate this kind of diversity of timing that we see with our applicants across both executive MBA and part-time MBA. If you look at the full-time MBA application process, there's typically just a handful of deadlines. All schools are generally on the same timeline. All programs start in August. Whereas if you look at working professional programs, be it executive MBA or part-time MBA programs, you see different matriculation dates across programs. You see different deadline structures, all kinds of things that tend to mean that people are researching and learning about these programs all throughout the year and coming to the realization that now is the right time for them to apply. And so on the executive MBA side, we have monthly deadlines, typically the 10th of every month, all focused on one matriculation date. The next time to start here at Darden is August 2025. And for part-time MBA, we have essentially deadlines every other month, starting in October, and it's the first of the month. So October 1, December 1, February 1, April 1, June 1. And for both of these programs, we'll continue to accept applications until the class fills, which is typically sometime in the summer. Last year, we recruited into June and July for both executive MBA and part-time MBA, again, which is very typical because we meet great people all throughout the year. So Zoe, how do you encourage candidates? So say somebody's listening to this podcast, they're thinking about applying. How do you encourage candidates to think about their application timing? When's a good time to apply?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to approach the timing, right? Of course, we want folks to submit the application that they feel is the most complete and the strongest representation of their candidacy. Now, that being said, in our process, I'll share is designed that we anticipate meeting qualified competitive candidates throughout all of the rounds. But, if merit-based funding is a strong consideration for you. It's no secret that there are more merit-based funds available early on in our cycle. But again, I do go back to that core that core principle that it really is important that you are submitting and completing an application you feel is the strongest and best representation of you. And I think that is the luxury of having the number of deadlines that we have for both the part-time and executive MBA program, is that you really do have some time and space to get to know the program, learn about us, and then really step back and think, is this the right next step for me as a candidate?
Yeah, we manage our scholarship budget with the idea that we're going to meet great candidates all throughout the year, and we know that finances are a big part of this decision. We certainly have more money to award in our early rounds, September, October. Certainly, as we're kicking things off, obviously we have our full budget at our disposal. As we go from round to round, we make some awards. Some of those awards are accepted, and so as we go forward in the cycle, we have less money, but we still have money to award, and we will continue to make scholarship awards into our last rounds of the cycle. Now, that said, if you're here listening to this podcast and thinking about applying, general advice is to apply as early as you feel like you can put together a strong application. So people always ask, well, how do I know it's a strong application? Well, in your own assessment, is it an application you feel confident in? Do you feel like you're putting your best foot forward? Do you feel like you've taken the steps, to Zoe's point, to really kind of put yourself in a position for success in the application process? You certainly don't want to rush an application, but there's still plenty of time left in our cycle. And the nice thing about applying for either of these programs, executive MBA or part-time MBA, is that things do move quickly on the review and evaluation front. You don't have to sit around and wait months for a decision. A typical timeline is, there's application deadline. You'll have a decision within about 3 weeks or so of that deadline. And then if you're admitted, you'll have about 3 or 4 weeks to make your decision, which, yeah, that may sound pretty fast to you, but we find that when people are busy, obviously very full lives, they want to know if Darden's going to be an option for them as quickly as possible. We try to still be deliberate and yet move quickly here. And we also know that ideally you've been doing your research all along, so that that sort of 3 to 4 week window to finalize a decision that feels manageable and doable to you. I think generally has proven to be so with applicants in the past. So anything else you want to add on this front?
Yeah, I think just when thinking about approaching the application process generally, one of the things that I spend a lot of time on, in one-on-one conversations or webinars is encouraging applicants to think about the process as a narrative exercise, and really thinking carefully about the story that you want to tell the admissions committee about who you are. So here at Darden, we speak a lot about the three legs of the stool that make up the application, and that's the personal, professional, and academic. And we are equally interested in all three. Um, you know, we talk a lot about this relational culture, the strong sense of community we have here at Darden. And of course, we are assessing academic readiness, and we are interested in your professional career, but the personal matters just as much. Who are you? What kind of learning team member will you be? What kind of classmate will you be? How will you show up within our community? But also your lived experiences and your perspectives are just as valuable in the classroom as are your professional experiences and your academic experiences. So thinking about all three of those pieces and encouraging folks to really bring all three of those pieces into the application in the best way that they can.
Yeah, people always ask us what makes a strong application, and my first answer is always it's someone who really knows who they are.
Mhm.
The more introspection and reflection you've put into this process, the clearer sense you have of who you are and why you want to take this step. What's exciting to you about an MBA and this program in particular. We love to hear interest in Darden that extends beyond just things like it's nearby or the schedule is convenient for me or it's a top ranked program. Those are all fine things, but is there something more personal that's really resonated with you about the program that reflects that research that you've been doing? That's always of interest to the committee, and we also want to understand your career goals, not just what you want to do, but why you want to do these things, and perhaps how have you engaged with these goals? What led you to the decision that yes, this is what I want to do short term and long term? Those motivations are of particular interest to us. It reflects out your values, how you make decisions. To Zoe's point, getting to know you as a whole person is a big priority for us through this application process. Application itself is kind of an initial introduction to who you are, and so it's important as people approach that application to kind of think about what do they want to convey in that application? What are their priorities? How do you encourage candidates to think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways that I encourage candidates to think about that. I think you have to step back and look at number one, what you've accomplished thus far and where you would like to go. So I think I always tell people it's it's hard to give direction if you don't know exactly where you are right now. And I think in order to understand where you are right now is to understand where you've come from. So you have to take a step back. And so that's sort of more in the theoretical, sort of meta thinking of thinking about your application and who you are and getting to know yourself. But then, another just sort of practical tip is to write some of these things down. When you think about your application, write down some of the priorities that fall under the personal, under the professional, and under the academic, and figure out. And sometimes they don't fall into those categories, but figure out, okay, based on what I have listed here as these priorities, how can I then make sure that each of these pieces are fitting into my application? Leveraging places like the resume. So in our application, we're not a stickler for resume format here at Darden. We would like folks to use the resume and the formatting of that resume that best reflects their accomplishments. But it's also a great place for you to put things that might not traditionally go on a job resume, things like languages spoken, countries traveled, podcasts listened to, interests, things like that. Our short answer section of the application is short intentionally, but it is a great place for you to tell us something that you want your future classmates to know about you, a time that you included somebody, and also your future short-term and long-term goals after you're achieving your MBA. So these are all the places that you can start to put those pieces of the puzzle into the application as you're thinking about achieving those priorities to tell that narrative and tell that story to the admissions committee.
Just 5-10 minutes, just listing out the things that you want to make sure that the admissions committee knows about you at the conclusion of reading your application. A really valuable exercise, and great if you do that before starting your application. It's actually something you can do as you're working on your application too. I think sometimes people get this advice and they're like, oh, well, I've already started. It's like, well, that's fine. Before you press submit on your application, you can kind of do a little bit of an audit, go back and read through your application. Is what you want to make sure is coming through to the admissions committee actually coming through? Are we learning the things about you that you absolutely want to make sure that we know? That sort of intentionality goes a long way. I always encourage people to sort of separate the application process from like thinking about it as like a job application. Oh, they asked for this information, I'll provide that information. They asked for this information, well, I'll upload that or upload this. You're thinking about it as our admissions committee will engage with your materials as a whole, how all of this is working together to give us this understanding of who you are and who you'll be in the Darden community. It's a really good way to think about it. And if you kind of think about sort of the way our process works, you submit the application, and then the application is evaluated for an interview invitation. So relatively quick review happens around the time of the application deadline. Most candidates will be invited to interview within a day or two of the deadline itself. Think about the application then as being something that sparks that review and says like, gosh, this is somebody we'd like to get to know better. This person seems interesting. They could be a really good match here for the Darden community. Let's get to know them better. That's one way. That's one way I always find helpful to think about the application and the role it plays in the sort of interview review and sort of the next step in the application process. And then the interview itself is always a little bit different here at Darden than maybe at some other schools. It's an anonymous interview. Your interviewer will not know much about you prior to that interaction. They will not have read your application in preparation for the interview. They will not have a copy of your resume in front of them. That's all very intentional. You want to talk a little bit more about our interview approach?
Yeah, I love our interview approach here at Darden. I think because we do interview anonymously. What that means is, and as you shared, Brett, is that your interviewer does not have the resume or a copy of the application in front of them. They will not have reviewed those items ahead of coming to the conversation. And the reason we do that is because we think it's the fairest way to get to know a candidate. The person interviewing you is not coming to the conversation with a set of preconceived notions or judgments about your career or your decisions thus far. They are really coming to the conversation with a listening ear to get to know you as a candidate. I think what's great about the interview is if you think about the application as like the 30,000-foot view, the overall, that larger story, that narrative, that's the purpose of the application. But then you get into an interview and it's this really wonderful opportunity to really kind of fill in fill in the gaps on some of the decisions you've made thus far. We're particularly interested in the why behind your choices. So why did you choose your undergraduate institution? Why that major? Why that first job out of college? Why the pivot? Why an MBA? Why now? Why Darden? It's a lot of why. But these conversations, and I refer to them often as conversations and not interviews because that's what they are. They're conversational, and the best interview is just like a conversation with someone who you've just met, likely, who wants to just to get to know more about you in that short period of time. So I just think it's a really great way for us to continue to get to know candidates, and it's a great way for candidates to continue to fill in those pieces of the story that probably won't always be in the application because the application has a limited amount of space, but it continues to build upon the narrative that you submitted through the application.
Yeah, the most important question to keep in mind if you're invited to interview, you should be excited about that. It means that you're being considered for an offer of admission. An interview is necessary to be admitted to any of our programs here at Darden, full-time, part-time, executive MBA. And the question you should keep in mind as you're preparing for your interview is why. Specifically, the why of your story. So, if you think about the application itself, it's kind of the 30,000 foot view of your story, things that you've done. We get a lot of information, but it's relatively shallow. We're not understanding from your application typically, the reasons why you've made the decisions that you've made, what's motivated you along this journey. Maybe we get a little bit of that, but not as much as we have an opportunity to learn through the interview. And the best interviews, people are introducing information, but also reflecting on what led them to make these choices and what led them to these different opportunities and roles, et cetera. So the example I always give to help people sort of understand what we're talking about here is around college. People oftentimes will consider multiple schools. They'll choose a school. They get to that school. They'll pick a major. After school, they'll start a career. Take a first job. Sometimes people just talk about those things. They just say, I went to college here, I majored in this, and then I took my first job here. What's really interesting to us in an interview setting is if you kind of bring us into the decision-making process. Where else were you considering college? How did you narrow down the list? What ultimately led you to choose the school that you chose? So again, that sort of why question, why this particular school? And when you got there, how did you figure out which major was right for you? Were there other paths you considered? I always think the other paths you considered piece is something that really gives a lot of context to your decision. It helps us kind of figure out what you weighed and gives a lot of color. And then to the point of like where you start your career, perhaps you considered other paths then. And bringing us into why you made these decisions, I think is the real value of the interview. Because so after the interview, the interviewer will write up what's discussed. It'll become part of the application. People really should be thinking about how the interview can help supplement our understanding of someone's story.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk just a little bit more about the application process. Is there a favorite tip or a piece of advice? Obviously, you've shared quite a bit of advice thus far. I think the point about narrative is really important, being intentional and sort of developing those priorities. But anything else you would encourage candidates to think about as they think about their application?
I always encourage candidates to lean into what makes them different and abandon this notion of a quote unquote typical business applicant. I often have conversations and folks will say, I am not a typical business school student or I don't have a typical business school background. My favorite sort of thing to say in response is, well, you're in good company. We have folks from all different backgrounds here at Darden. And quite frankly, that's how the case method works and works well, is the ability for faculty to pull in different experiences and different perspectives of folks in the room. But even, if you want to speak concretely just about the numbers in the actual space, the Executive MBA program has 25 industries represented, 100 unique employers in the class. Part-time MBA, 21 industries represented in the class, 67 unique employers. So when we say we have folks from all different types of backgrounds, we do. And so really lean into what makes you different. That's really going to be important because our job in admissions is to build a class with the most difference, not to create a class of similarity.
I love that advice. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a candidate and they are worried that they don't have the right background and they are invariably indexing themselves to some imagined business school candidate. I think one of the most important things for people to know is that there are no perfect business school candidates. Everybody has strengths. Everybody has areas that they wish in their background that were stronger. Your goal as an applicant is to make sure those strengths come forward. And to Zoe's point, really lean into what makes you different. We're building for that classroom environment. We want as much difference as possible in that room. We're trying to have a group of people who will have the most interesting discussion about these cases possible, and that really does start with difference. And so, Zoe, what are you looking forward to in the months ahead? We talked a little bit about the fall. Spring will be here soon enough. What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, there's so much to look forward to in the coming months ahead. But in February we'll have another panel discussion, leadership and legacy, with the Darden Black alumni, Black professional MBA student organization. It will have Darden Black alumni will come and speak about their experience at Darden and offer advice to current and prospective students. So I think that will be a really great event that will take place in person here at San Stanley Grounds on February 14th. But I'm also looking forward to, in the spring, a new event that we are doing. It's called Fetch New Connections. It's a Darden dog meetup that we'll have here in DC. And as a dog owner myself, I'm excited to combine two things that I'm really passionate about: dogs and connecting with prospective students. So that will take place on March 29th, and I'm really looking forward to it.
We have never had an event where we have had to sort of ask the question, how many people will be at this event and how many dogs do you think will be at this event? We have separate head counts for dogs and people, and separate capacity for dogs and people, interestingly enough.
Naturally.
Yeah, I'm excited about both of those events. I think they'll be great. We're doing webinars too. We always do a lot of webinars. We know how busy folks are, and it may not necessarily be possible just given the geographic spread on our applicant and prospective student pools for everybody to come by in the grounds or do something with us in DC. And we have a lot of upcoming webinars. A series that I'm excited about that we've been hosting over the past year or so is My Darden Journey, which is students reflecting upon their MBA journeys, what led them to Darden, the impact of the experience thus far. We've got one of those coming up a little bit later this month in January. And again, March, we kind of host those sessions kind of every other month. We also are going to be doing some student oriented webinars about the academic experience here for both executive MBA and part-time MBA, recognizing that one of the big challenges for people who are doing, or at least learning about these kinds of programs, is that if you look at an executive MBA program at one school, you can't be confident that the other school that you're also considering is oriented in the exact same way, that the schedule is the same, that the way the curriculum is designed is the same. If you look at full-time MBA programs, you kind of know the general outlines of the experience, but executive MBA programs, part-time MBA programs, every school seems to do this a little bit differently. And we wanted to bring people into the experience a little bit more, particularly, Darden is a school that's really made its reputation around the educational experience, the academic experience. And so these sessions we broken into kind of like focusing on the first year or the core curricular experience, and then also then talking about the electives experience, again, across both our executive MBA and part-time MBA programs. And I'm excited to offer those because I think we have some exciting stories to share. The core is such like a unique thing at Darden. Everybody takes the same classes. Nobody places out any classes. It's a real bonding experience for students across our programs. You have a learning team that you're working closely with to prepare for class. A lot of that social connective tissue comes together early in that process. And then electives, one of the interesting things that started to happen here with the introduction of our part-time MBA program is we have students now taking electives across programs. We actually have full-time MBA students that will sometimes come up and take executive MBA electives. We have part-time MBA students that will take executive MBA electives, executive MBA students who will join part-time MBA electives. We also have sometimes part-time MBA and executive MBA students that will take a January term or J term elective down in Charlottesville with full-time MBA students. I've been here for 10 years. This is all really kind of kicked off in the past couple of years, but that flexibility is really exciting. And I'm excited to highlight that in those upcoming webinars. So if you're looking for any of these events, you can always find them on our website. But we have a very busy spring, and of course, class visits and tours and all the things that we talked about earlier for those of you who want to come and check out our space and get a little bit closer to the student experience. So Zoe, any final thoughts you would want to share with our listeners here?
My final thought is just allow us in admissions to be a resource. Embarking on an MBA is a really big decision. It's not one that should be taken lightly, especially as a working professional. There are a lot of moving parts there. And so we're always happy to be thought partners, provide answers to questions as they come up, but leverage us as a resource as you are embarking on this journey.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we're here to help. We don't think of our roles as sales roles. We think of ourselves as counselors. We're here to listen, to help you learn. As I mentioned, one of the biggest challenges for anybody considering a working professional program is that you have to take time to learn about each school in a kind of very detailed way. And so that's where we can be helpful. Our website is helpful. Certainly do that sort of initial preliminary research. But you get a little bit deeper into it. We offer one-on-one conversations. You can connect directly with our team. We have these drop-in sessions that we have. It's essentially 1 or 2 a month around Ask Us Anything. Welcome to join for those virtual conversations. Just look for an opportunity to make connections because, of course, we also enjoy getting to know the students. Kind of where we began with Zoe's story. The best thing about the role that we have is the opportunity to really get to know people through this process and to make those connections and help them figure out if Darden is really the place for them. So thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad we got you on the podcast. I'm sorry it took a few months to do this, but it's been great chatting with you.
Thanks so much, Brett. I enjoyed our time.
And that was my conversation with Zoe Mayfield Boykin, Associate Director of Admissions for Professional Degree Programs here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's ExecMBA @darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.